Duke Nukem Forever was one of the most eagerly anticipated games of all time, and it subsequently failed to live up to the fans' expectations, but in this video game court, it's innocent until proven guilty. Court is now in session for an epic episode of Innocent Until Proven Guilty. After almost exclusively tackling the worst games IUPGs for the majority of 2018, I figured it was time to return to the conventional format, and there's no better candidate to mark the occasion with than what's turned out to be one of the top 5 requested trials in the history of the series. This notorious offender is perhaps only rivaled by E.T. for the Atari 2600 in terms of its reputation, and it nearly single-handedly destroyed the franchise from which it spawned, so without further ado, the time has finally arrived for the infamous Duke Nukem Forever to be tried for its crimes against the gaming community. Initially unveiled to the public during E3 1998, Duke Nukem Forever went through a seemingly never-ending development cycle that saw the arrival and departure of several significant studios before eventually being released by 2K Games and Gearbox Studio for the PC and 7th Gen consoles in the summer of 2011. The Borderlands creators and current owner of the classic IP were determined to deliver the title that the fans have been clamoring for, and the over-the-top cinematic and prologue kicked this grand graphic adventure off on the perfect note. From the shoulder button P prompt to the suggestive happy ending reward for finishing the recreation of 3D's climactic boss battle, the trademark testosterone-fueled frat boy humor is back and elevated to a whole new level, and John St. John delivers the crude but comedic one-liners in his unique badass style.
Power on. Now it's time to kick some ass. Duke wins. Fatality. Take a bite of Duke's special pain cake. Douche.
The tone-establishing prologue transitions into the story proper, where the titular vigilante is now a heralded hero, living in a mansion and surrounded by women who want to be with him and men who want to be him. In the midst of waiting for a late-night talk show appearance and eating up the constant admiration from his adoring audience, another alien invasion breaks out, and he's warned by the president and general not to interfere in the matter as he retreats to his Duke cave. Nukem reluctantly obliges, but things quickly take a turn for the worse when the ETs become hostile, forcing humanity's savior out of retirement and into full-on ass-kicking mode. As to be expected from the massive success of its predecessor, Duke Nukem Forever carries over the FPS format from 3D, but it's been altered in a manner to more closely resemble the modern titans of the genre. Gone are the medkits and armor of old, replaced with regenerative health and an ego meter. The ego meter works in conjunction with the Duke's overall state of well-being, and it can be boosted by performing a variety of manly tasks such as lifting weights, winning an air hockey match, and ogling his own reflection, to name just a few of the more family-friendly options.
Who's that handsome devil? Look at my ass. Do it now.
This alpha male fantasy trip continues into the power-ups that Duke utilizes against the revenge-seeking aliens, as drinking beer makes him temporarily stronger and downing a bottle of steroids accentuates his hand-to-hand combat skills. Nukem is not surprisingly adept with his Fists of Fury, and he can swiftly execute any and all foes that stand in his way, but when all else fails, it's time to turn to the heavy artillery. Over the course of the battle for Earth's survival, Duke gains access to an impressive arsenal of weapons, from the typical pistols and shotguns to the extraordinarily destructive RPG and Devastator, and the amusing yet highly effective Shrink and Freeze Rays. This formidable firepower does a great job of leveling the playing field and helping us in our virtual avatar get out from one tight spot after another, but with the exception of the freeze ray, they're extremely limited on ammo. There are some ammo refills scattered around Forever's widely spanning stages, and we can collect the leftover possessions of the dispatched enemies, but it's still very easy to run out of bullets, and this is exacerbated by the fact that we can only carry 2 weapons at a time. This to me made no sense whatsoever. I can understand the gun limitation if this was a more reality-based shooter such as Call of Duty, but this is Duke frickin' Nukem. He's the epitome of all the action hero cliches, so he should have a weapon hidden in all of his major cavities, but the devs decided for some stupid reason to nerf his legendary awesomeness, and I feel that this is very detrimental to Forever's overall fun factor. Fortunately, there are unlimited lives and a fairly balanced checkpoint system to ensure that the forward momentum is maintained in spite of this handicap, but this is offset by the egregiously long loading screens we have to sift through if we fail to overcome the alien onslaught. Forever seems to be a very fitting title for this despised entry in the Duke Nukem catalog, as sitting through these ridiculously out-of-place loading times feels like an eternity, and that is sadly just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the flaws plaguing 2K and Gearbox's problematic project. For starters, the presentation, along with the content itself, is very dated. The visuals are well below the capabilities of the hardware, and there are occasional frame rate issues and bugs that hinder the peak performance. As with the title that preceded it, Forever is clearly going for a 70s and 80s B-movie vibe, but the aesthetic doesn't really reflect that. It would have been appropriate for the various production crews to emulate the gritty and retro style a la House of the Dead overkill, but they instead opted for a dull and muted look that tries to appease the modern marketplace, but it alienates the core fanbase in the process. As someone who has very little experience with the franchise and only occasionally plays FPS games, I don't really fall into either of those target demographics, but I was still pleased with Forever's level variety, although I had some serious criticisms in regards to the mechanics. As mentioned previously, Forever is comprised of over 20 widely expansive stages ranging from a Las Vegas casino to an industrial plant in the vast stretches of uninhabited desert landscapes, and Duke mans turrets against enemy alien ships, faces an army of giants after stepping on the shrink pads, and blazes over the open roads in his turbocharged truck. Forever clearly takes more risks than some of its genre peers, and for that, I'll give full credit and respect to the dev team, but while this blending of styles works well for the most part, there are some aspects that are unwarranted and unwelcome. The platforming segments, for example, are clever in concept but clunky in execution. The first-person perspective and less than ideal controls made it tough to judge the jump distance, and I lost count of the number of times that I fell to my death. The underwater areas were even more of a pain since we're not only fighting our ever-diminishing air supply, but also trying to ward off a vicious swarm of octobabies, and the aforementioned loading screens factored on top of it all made me want to ram my head into the nearest wall to ease the pain. As if that weren't bad enough, there are numerous puzzles that have to be completed in order to progress our journey, and the game provides zero instruction on how to solve them. I always hold off on resorting to an FAQ until it's absolutely necessary, but it felt like I was constantly referring to one for this game because it's completely unintuitive. To be fair, I had to record my footage under a heavy time crunch, so that definitely contributed to my lack of patience, but I still feel that they should have incorporated some kind of Dead Space-esque guidance system to alleviate the feeling of walking aimlessly around in a circle. If you manage to get through the gauntlet of platforming pitfalls and obtuse puzzles, you'll eventually encounter the diverse lot of grotesque creatures that function as Duke Nukem Forever's bosses. As with the regular enemies, the bosses range in difficulty from extremely easy to hair-pullingly hard, and many of them require the player to have complete and utter concentration to counteract the attacks of the multi-pronged mutated monsters. The final boss was in many ways the most disappointing of all, since it's essentially a more complex version of the one from the prologue, and our reward for eliminating the alien menace once and for all is an equally lackluster ending that sets up a sequel that will probably never happen because of Forever's critical and consumer backlash.
Duke, now that the aliens are dead and you've saved the world once again, what are you going to do?
I'm gonna run for president. Hail to the king, baby.
Duke Nukem Forever is a game that had to overcome almost impossible odds to come into existence, but in spite of it all, 2K and Gearbox managed to pull it off and get it out there, albeit in a less than ideal manner. The trademark elements that put the series on the map are mostly retained, and they're joined by some clever new ideas that helped enhance the overall experience. The action is intense and the frame rate is mostly solid, with the music setting the appropriate tone for each situation. The audio department is further complemented by the narrative performance of John St. John, who did a fantastic job of bringing the ball-busting badass back to life with his signature one-liners. On the other hand, the same one-liners were often kind of tasteless and pushed the boundaries of what is acceptable in the current social climate. For lack of a better word, I'm not an SJW by any means, and I enjoy controversial comedy as much as the next person, but there was just something about Forever's masculinity on overdrive atmosphere that made me feel dirty. I'm not going to show it because I want to keep this video as family friendly as possible, but there were a number of instances where I rolled my eyes at the sheer immaturity of it all. I just recently played through South Park: The Stick of Truth for the first time, a game that created quite a controversy itself and features comedy that a lot of people will find to be very tasteless, but you can tell that it was crafted by a group of witty and intelligent writers. Duke Nukem Forever, in comparison, is about as lowest common denominator as you can get, and it feels as if the writers crammed in as many un-PC jokes as possible just for the sake of being extremely edgy. With that said though, I can't and won't judge it solely based on its crass nature, and I'll openly admit that this is far from the worst game I've ever played, and I don't even think it's as bad as everyone makes it out to be. But when you take those stupid jokes and combine them with the mediocre presentation, the clunky and unintuitive mechanics, and the lack of proper guidance, you have an undeniable recipe for disaster, which is why I rule that the verdict is guilty, and I condemn it once and for all to the IUPG jail. Gearbox and 2K did the best that they could in bringing this mythological entity to life, but it appears that Duke Nukem Forever was cursed from the start, and I might go as far as saying that the FPS icon himself is an aged relic that should have stayed in the past. I'm sure I'm going to get some people ready to crucify me in the comments for having that opinion, but I hope that they can understand where I'm coming from, just as I'm fully supportive of their right to love this game if they choose. After all, I enjoy a lot of titles that are even more questionable in quality than this, so I'm not going to judge anyone for their taste in games. Anyway, now that this monumental trial has come to a close, I've got a Cygnus Destroyer review to work on. Be sure to come back for that and leave any suggestions for future episodes in the comments below, but until then, court is now adjourned! Thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw and you want to see more, the boxes on the screen right now will lead to some more of my videos, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel by clicking on my avatar in the bottom right hand corner. Thanks again.